Let's flow. Let's connect and flow. This podcast is not here to challenge, dismantle, or replace anyone's faith. I deeply honor religious tradition and the role they play in providing structure, meaning, and connection to the Creator. What I share here is simply another perspective, one that expanded my understanding over time. You're invited to listen with curiosity, not just agree, and to keep what resonates while releasing what doesn't. Thank you for being part of episode 2, Free Will, Choice, and Soul Sovereignty. On part 1, we talked about the origin of soul, whether born sovereign or sinner, whatever that origin was. We also talked about where do our belief about the soul begin. We talked about the origin story that shapes our identity. Sovereignty as a choice or sin as an obligation. We talked about deconstruction as growth, not necessarily rebellion, right? And a lot of us are deconstructing even before we heard that label. Like for me, I didn't know when I was young, the question that I always ask, what more, was part of my deconstruction, that I was always asking questions about the religious origin story that didn't fit, that didn't sound right to me. Okay. And that was a part of deconstructing for me. That was a part of the awakening process for me. Maybe not for someone else. All right. So here we are, episode 2. I called it Free Will, Choice, and Soul Sovereignty, and or Sin Requirement. Okay. This theme is, or says, or ask, is free will about obedience or about conscious responsibility? Is it about obedience, which I, growing up in a Baptist background, always was led to believe that it's about you need to obey, okay? If you obey what the minister says or pastor, whatever they called themselves, as the message that they were sharing about parts of the Bible, or about the story of being a sinner, and for me, it was that Jesus died on the cross so that you would no longer be a sin. He shed his blood. If you believe on the blood of Jesus, you are no longer a sinner, but you still have to work to get a place in heaven. God is still going to judge you on your everyday doings. Okay. So free will is one of the most powerful ideas in spirituality or in religiosity. Yet it is often misunderstood depending on what we believe about our soul. So if the soul is believed to be born sinful, free will looks a certain way. If it's believed to be born sovereign, free will feels and looks a different way. The invitation here is to choose a belief for your highest and greatest good. Or you don't have to choose a belief at all, but just to notice about what you're believing, how it shows up in your real life, how you feel about it. what it feels like to you. For me, even though I found a non-denominational church through all my searching that I thought was going to make everything feel right, the origin story was still the same. It went from Baptist upbringing and theology to a non-denominational, born-again doctrination, which now turned it outward from me to me getting everybody else saved, which I won't even say it worked for a little while. It was always uncomfortable to me to give the spiel that someone gave to me, but I said, oh, okay, my ego said that sounds right. That sounds better. It sounds like a step up. But I wasn't asking in embodying questions like, how would I like somebody saying that to me? Right. But immediately my what next question showed up. Okay. And started opening up these questions that made me search for more, for my what more, because it still didn't feel right to me, not to someone else. So I'm not here to change anybody from their religiosity or their spiritual movement. It's for you to decide where you want to go with this information that I found out helped me and that I see other people asking about. So all I'm going to do is share the information, right? So what we're going to start with is the invitation, again, I say, isn't to choose a belief, but to notice how each understanding shows up in your real life. Okay, so we're going to start with free will in the sin-based model. Okay, in the sin-based model framework, free will exists, or it lives as strict structure with strict boundaries. Choices are often framed as right or wrong. That's how I grew up in the Baptist background. Obedience or disobedience. Now, when I got home to my mom said, hey, what questions do you want to ask? You know, okay, my mother may not have known the answer, but she was always helpful in pointing me in the right direction or giving me permission to keep asking the questions, right? Choices are often framed as right or wrong, obedience or disobedience. There is usually a strong emphasis on choosing correctly. Everybody's pointing to you, oh, that's not right. You need to be right. You need to come politically correct when you're talking to me. Because choices are believed to be carried both earthly and eternally. You have those choices that you make are both the now, in the outwardly now moment, the choice that you're making and what's going to happen, and then what's going to happen for your eternal life with the Creator, Almighty God, or eternal damnation. Okay? And remember, I'm not trying to talk anything down. I'm just telling you how I felt, how I grew, and then you get to make these choices according to your highest and greatest good, what you feel is for your highest and greatest good, or not. Take what resonates and leave what doesn't. Free will becomes the ability to choose God's will over personal desire. Because every time I turned around, it was about God's will, not my will. But God gave me free will. But, let's not think about that. Because God's will should be your will. If something bad happened, it must have been God's will for it to happen to you. That's how I grew up. That's how I heard every adult in church talk. So this model builds a discipline, builds a devotion, or builds a commitment to the outside creator, not the creator within. It creates a order, a order of moral clarity from the outside in. At the same time, it can also create a fear-based decision that is being made. And then if you make mistakes, it can feel dangerous rather than teaching you, rather than being instructive. Okay? And of course, I always share a quote. Okay? And this is one of the quotes that I was taught in Bible school that I kind of sort of remember. So I hope I've got it right in, I'm going to paraphrase. It's Joshua 24:15. It says, "Choose this day whom you serve." I always remember that. Because serving self was wrong in the religiosity community. You have to serve God. And if something bad happened to you, it must have been God's will. So here are some gentle, reflective questions that I started to ask myself. Okay. Have I ever avoided a choice because I was afraid of being wrong? And I answered myself, yes. Where did I first learn that mistakes were dangerous? While I was in church. For me, that was part of Sunday school. Information from the Bible, as read through the perception of the pastor or the Sunday school teacher. And it usually was the pastor, the assistant pastor, and the Sunday school teachers had a meeting, had a committee. Okay? That's where I learned it from. But these are soft and gentle reflection questions that you can ask yourself. So let me turn that around. You can ask yourself, when I make decisions, do I feel calm or pressured? Have I ever felt like avoiding a choice because I was scared it was going to be wrong? You can even ask yourself, where did these thoughts come from about mistakes, about making choices, about they were dangerous? I also ask myself, how does my body feel when I think about choosing correctly? Sometimes I get really anxious, or I would get, and I still do, but I would get really anxious when I was in my teens and in my preteens and early teens, and even in my young adult while I was raising my children as a single mother, which, by the way, religiosity poo-pooed that and looked down on me, that I couldn't raise my kids unless I had a man, unless I married a man, and it was a religious man that would carry the role of religion throughout the household. Okay. That was the origin story. It may not be in every religious breakdown, but that was a origin story. And there's infinite possibilities of origin stories. You got to find out what yours was or is. Okay. So let's talk about free will in the sovereign soul model, the model that the soul takes on as a sovereign being, that it It is recalling that it's a sovereign being. Okay. So, in the sovereign perspective, free will is central. Your soul is seen as choosing to embody itself, entering this life as an experiment rather than a test. And I know a lot of religious people have always heard the minister or different parishioners say, God is a test. It's a test. Everything's a test. Right? Choices still have consequences in the sovereign model, but those consequences are not made up of punishments. They end up being a type of feedback, right? Okay. Hold on a second. Here we go. Okay. So I'll repeat that again. In the sovereign model, soul model, choices still have consequences, but they're just not punishment. There's their feedback of having an experience and asking, what is this experience teaching me? You can ask, why is it happening? But what is it teaching me while it's happening? Instead of asking, what's wrong with this choice, you get to ask the question, what did this choice teach me? It's a possibility, infinite possibility, right? Responsibility comes from awareness. And don't get it wrong. We're not supposed to fear. That's a part of the polarity that we're supposed to learn from. But we should not become a victim or encaged in the fear. If fear happens, you get to ask the question, why is this so fearful for me? What is there? What is it about this that I'm scared of? Growth is going to happen. Stepping into the unknown is going to happen. And that's the scary part until you step into it. And it's a natural part of experience. At least that's what I learned from me. Take what resonates. I decided I didn't want to be a victim to fear anymore. Doesn't mean I'm not going to get scared. Just means that I get to ask, okay, why is it so scary to me? Responsibility, I say again, comes from awareness, not from fear. Fear could be a product of what you're becoming aware of, or not a product. You can be becoming aware through fear what you need to do next. Growth happens naturally through experiences. So William Erminus Himley said, and I hope I quote this right, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. I think I said it correctly. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. William Ernest Himley or Himsley. I think it's Himley. Go check it out. Henlye. Okay. So you get to ask yourself some general questions. I found out instead of being hard-nosed with myself, I had to go inward, which is about knowing thyself. You have to go inward. That's what sovereignty is about. Knowing yourself from the inside out. Right? When have I had my hardest experience taught to me the most? I get to ask myself that, not wait for somebody to point it out to me from the outside in, right? I get to ask myself, and I've done this quite often, how do I respond to consequences? Because sometimes I get so pissed, and then other times I get anxious and nervous. Sometimes I used to shame myself by comparing myself to someone else instead of getting curious. Now I get curious. I get to also ask myself, what changes when I see life as feedback and instead of judgment or fear? It doesn't mean fear doesn't happen, and it doesn't mean judgment doesn't come up in a moment. What happens if I shift it? What happens if I trust myself to take the experience and learn? What happens if I have accountability without shame? Sovereignty doesn't mean that responsibility is removed. It means that it becomes deeper. It deepens it. You get to acknowledge when something is harming you. Repair matters. You get to acknowledge it and then seek out a question that helps you learn how to repair the harm. And through that knowledge, growth is expected. It's okay to expect it. Through sovereignty, your soul is never labeled as unworthy. In church and religious, I was always told unworthy. Every song that I heard in our hymn books had something about being a human that's unworthy. I'm unworthy of your light. I'm unworthy of your love. That was for me acknowledging, going, ooh, I don't feel good. Well, why did the Almighty God make me then? That was my question as a child. Well, why even have any of these experiences if I'm unworthy of it? Of the origin story. The origin story, filtered that down. Right? But in sovereignty, which, man, I'm so glad I started to learn about this and actually listening to my higher self say, I love you. From the inside out, I got to experience that. Doesn't mean everyone's going to experience it. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. You might think that I'm very wrong, and it's okay for you to think that way. I am not going to argue. This is not the page that is going to argue it with you or debate it. I will not debate what you believe is for your highest and greatest good. Okay? Instead of saying, I am bad, the question becomes, what needs attention here? What needs to happen here? What needs to change so I don't feel uncomfortable in this moment? Mistakes become your teacher, not your verdict. When I started to shift, all this started to shift for me. My origin story started to make sense. My next origin story started to make sense. But I had to have the original or origin story probably to ask the questions that I asked. It wasn't that the origin story was bad. The origin story just for me had gaps. And it was coming from the outside and the perspective of others who were not judging, not discerning, but judging, and then giving the information that didn't feel good for me. Okay. In this soul model, failure is just simply an opportunity to begin again. Some things you don't get the first time, and that's okay. Okay. That becomes the time that you get to ask a more intelligent question to yourself. Right? And I've got a quote for that. Henry Ford said, "Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently." Go look him up, Henry Ford. You get to ask gentle questions once again to yourself. How do I usually respond when I make a mistake? Originally, when I used to make mistakes, I would judge myself harshly. I was not kind with my words. Right? And shame was used as my teacher in my life. Perfect example. Your husband left you. You ended up getting divorced and being a single mother of 3. That's shameful in the Baptist church at the time that I was coming up in the church, in the 70s and in the 80s. I was told by the women of the church that I needed to find a good Christian man in the church and let him raise your kids. And then they went off. I was in my 30s, and they went off to try to find me the proper husbands who were in their 50s and smelled like what I considered Lysol or Pine Sol at that particular time. Right? But in sovereignty, as a sovereign soul, I had to take accountability for self-rejection. I had to take accountability for all these people saying these things to me and ask myself, how do I feel? How do I feel? I know what their perspective of what they think I should do or should not do, or what went wrong, or what choices I made. Right? But what about me? In the sovereignty of asking my higher being or my soul being, I got to ask from the inside out. I got to ask, what would accountability look like without self-rejection? Can I hold responsibility and compassion at the same time for myself? My answer, eventually, more and more and more, was yes. Let's talk about how choice shapes the nervous system, how it shapes the soul. Fear-based choices often create tension. We know that. It creates tension, anxiety, and self-doubt. When that fear in that negative polarity shows up, yeah, because you've got your subconscious or unconscious, which is your ego self, that's got a lot of information filed away, but it's the same information over and over again that it pulls from. So it's unconscious. It hasn't stepped in to a field of the unknown without being fearful. Right? Free will doesn't just live in the mind, it lives in your body. It lives in our bodies. Fear-based choices often create tension, anxiety, and self-doubt. I said that again. Awareness-based choices often create curiosity. It brings you into your now moment. It makes you more present. And you feel more grounded. This doesn't mean sovereign choices are always easy. Sometimes they're tough. Isn't it? It's the experience that your soul has taken on. And your body is the vehicle that is carrying the soul in the journey. It means the soul trusts itself to move through discomfort with honesty through your vessel. You're given everything to be honest with yourself, even if something is difficult. Been there, done that. Still doing that. Once again, we get to share gentle questions that help us, right? How does my body feel when I'm afraid? When I'm afraid of choosing something that could possibly be wrong, right? How does my body feel when I make a choice that I trust? You get to feel the difference between the two. How are you going to know? You're learning. This is you taking your higher self, or your higher self taking you and your egoic self, or your unconscious self, unknowing self about everything, and learning. You get to ask, do I know the difference between pressure and clarity? Because sometimes we don't. Sometimes we think the answers through pressure meant that we got a clear vision of what we were getting into. Right? Sometimes we don't know the difference between pressure and clarity. But the situation is bringing us to that understanding and teaching, right? What does my nervous system need in order for me to feel safe in whatever I'm choosing? What does my nervous system need? Ask yourself. Go. That's what know thyself means. Go within. Right? Your personal expansion through learning is required. Not necessary, but it's required because that's part of evolution. You can evolve slowly, or you can evolve like quickly through you educating yourself about you. Your movement towards sovereignty didn't come from rejecting God. It came from being curious and asking more questions from within rather than from outside in. And then asking those questions about yourself, about what you're choosing, about how you feel, helped you expand your understanding about God or the matrix or the illusion or the almighty or the creator, whatever the terminology is. You begin to understand it from within, from the inside out. It means you grow more aware. You become more aware about the inner truth that helped you become clear, that helped your expression of you become clearer to you. Right? This shows that belief can evolve gently. You don't have to be rebellious. You can go through deconstruction, but you don't have to rebel against God. But other people might think you are. You're walking away from God. That's the first thing. Every time I turn around, there's certain people in my family that tell me I need to have a come to Jesus moment, because they don't understand my choices or my sovereignty, because they see my choices from a different origin story. They don't see it from sovereignty. They see it from the sin story, the Adam and Eve story, right? So as information grows and awareness grows, I'm sorry. Hold on. Okay. And I'm going to have a sip of water. So as information grew for me, as awareness grew for me, inner truth became clearer for me. I'm not going to say it's going to happen for you. It's about what you believe, what you hold true as you're in your belief system, that you activate and move through continuously as an action that eventually becomes your truth. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. Right? This shows that belief can evolve gently, without rebellion. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. That's a Zen proverb. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. So you're also the teacher within you, your higher being. And my higher being helped me with questions, always asking questions. What experiences have quietly shifted my belief? A lot of experiences have shifted my original origin story to the origin story of being a sovereign soul, or being with a body and a conscious and aware mind. But when I talk, I have a lot of experiences that I wrote about in my book, but I don't give the total breakdown of it, because I don't want people engrossed in the active part of it and judging it. I want them to get the meat and potatoes of the experience. You get enough of that from movies and TV and books that entertain you, right? Where has curiosity led you? Is it leading you deeper into truth, rather farther away from it? Is it leading you more deeply into you, or further away in the story outside of you? Only you can decide that. I had to ask, have I allowed myself to change without judging myself for it? And at first, no. But now, yes. And then I got to ask, what is trying to change me right now? Because there is always change going on within me. And if it's going on within me, it's reflecting outside of me. Free will may not be about choosing right versus wrong. It may be about choosing awareness over fear without limiting yourself to always being right and trying to run from being fearful. Fear is part of the tools that you're going to learn how to operate in your experience, in your story. It's one of many tools. It's just not meant for me, I believe, to get stuck in it and become a prisoner to it. Fear is a learning tool. The polarities, the what we call the upper polarities and the lower polarities are both polarities that we learn from. Sovereignty doesn't mean answering to nothing. It means learning to answer honestly to yourself. I had to learn how to answer or ask the questions and answer and receive the answer honestly to myself so that I could grow and expand. That it was all okay to acknowledge when something wasn't for my highest and greatest good. There's something that didn't feel good, something that took me to from fear to being scary, to being inquisitive, to being curious. But I had to go from outside of me to inside of me. For me, that's what I believe sovereignty does. It allows the soul to say, this is the way I originally came in. Now I can see everything and ask an honest question of my vehicle. Why are we crying today? Why do we feel so bad for this loss? Explain it to me, teach it to me. Right? What does it feel like inside my body right now when I start being curious about new things? Do I feel anxious? Why do I feel anxious? Let me go to that anxious, and let me talk to my unconscious self. Can you let go a minute? Let us let go so we can try something out. And my higher self will say, come on, just try it. Kind of like that Mikey commercial. Give it to Mikey. He likes everything. Right? But then the kids tried it and they liked it, right? Okay. When in my life am I being invited to be more, or being part of being more aware? Not being better behaved, but being more aware. If I trust myself just a little bit more, what might shift? If I tell my ego, if we just trust just a little bit more, we get to feel a shift, maybe. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. Right? Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. Be curious about yourself in your community. Be curious about yourself in your experiences with love and joy, and your experiences with education, your experiences with other people. Ask yourself an embodying question as you're getting pulled into situations and circumstances that are making you start to making your eye twitch. Ask yourself an embodying question. Why is my eye twitching now? What is it about this situation that I feel uncomfortable about? It opens a question that will be answered from the inside out. It doesn't mean everything is going to be right. It doesn't mean that everything is going to be wrong. It just means that you get to ask an embodying question when it feels right or it feels wrong. That's part of the life experience. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to remind you that you get to ask yourself about your beliefs, about where your beliefs sit because of the whatever origin story was taught to you, that you took in. You made it yours, even if you were a child. And when you grew up and became an adult, you went on this journey with that origin story. And if you bumped up against something that is telling you that this doesn't work for you anymore, you get to ask all these soft core, kind, embodying questions for yourself. It doesn't mean that you're going to morph into the original or the origin story that I morphed into, but it means that something is about to change for you, and you're giving yourself a peaceful time, or you're giving yourself kindness and love so that you can ask that question without feeling like you're leaving everything you knew behind because somebody else said, well, if you ask these questions, you're walking out on God. Been there, done that too. I've turned my back on God. I was even asked, well, now that you believe in the law of the universal laws, and you believe in, the sovereignty, and you believe in all these different books that you're reading, and I'm reading like the Law of One, the Raw Chronicles. I've read the Divine Design by Lori Ladd. I've read a lot of books. There's my bookcase there. It may not be a bookcase that there are like people have a whole library, but for me, it's starting with these books because I asked questions, and the divine said, "Let it be so. You want to know? Okay." And the divine said to me, I call the divine the creator, and I was also asked, "Why don't you use the word God?" For me, God had been overplayed, that God had been transformed from man, making God about man, recreating God in man's image. So for me, it didn't work. And I had to say, okay, it's not working. That's not working for me outside. What more do I need to grow and expand? Because I do know that I require myself to grow and expand. I require myself to evolve. What do I need? And I opened myself to that. Right? Remember this, like Henry Ford stated, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again. It takes you into a more intelligent moment. You get to ask an embodying question of yourself. Sovereignty doesn't remove responsibility. It deepens it. You get to ask yourself about how your body feels when you're pressured. You get to ask yourself how you feel when you're in the vibration of clarity. So you can define it to your higher self and to your egoic self. Your body gets to talk to your higher self and your egoic self. Your personal expansion begins with your embodying questions to you. Know thyself. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. Trust yourself a little more to find out information about your origin story, whatever it is. I'm just using two of these origin stories because that's where I came from. That's how I had to grow and expand, through those two origin stories. So I want to thank you for being part of episode 2. Thank you so much. When we return next Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, it will be episode 3. It will be about death, heaven, and returning to God. These are all part of an origin story that I learned, was part of my growth and expansion to a certain point, and then learning a different origin story about how I learned to view death, heaven, or the law of absolute, or the realm. I'll put it this way: the realm of absolute. I learned that terminology from the divine coming out of meditation, that told me everything for me. So episode 3 is going to be exciting for me, as this was. So I want you to stay tuned on my YouTube and on my Facebook, and share me with others so that they can grow and expand. If you feel that they need a little information about origin stories, about sovereignty, about sin, about any of this, if they're asking questions already, share these first 2 episodes and tell them to join us next Monday. So like, subscribe, and share. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I love you. I'm going to say, I will see you on Monday. I am also going to say, I will see you on Wednesday with Ascending Beyond Limitations on YouTube, Facebook, and I believe Instagram. I'm not sure right now if it's going to be a pre-recorded or if it's going to be a live, but join us. Take care. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. One love, wholeness, and balanced, unconditional love to you and yours.